This podcast is brought to you by ShortsTV and is not affiliated with the Oscars or the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in any way.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to the ShortsTV podcast. I'm Carter Pilcher and I'm joined as always by the enlightening Rasha Goel.
Oh, Carter, I love the adjectives that you come up with every week for me. Enlightening. I like that one. It's always great to be back. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Really great. But voting closes tomorrow and I'm going to have to make a decision and cast my vote.
Ooh, any chance I can get a little sneak peek on that?
Rasha, I would love to tell you, but I don't even know yet who I'm going to vote for. It's so tricky. The films this year especially, there are 5 fabulous films in each category for different reasons. They're each great. And I really don't know. I'm hopeful that the guests today will give us some insight.
Yeah, that must be nerve-wracking. Well, our guests are here to help us all, including those who want to win their Oscar pool. So joining us on today's podcast are Proma Khosla, an entertainment reporter at Mashable, Michael Ordoña, who covers film and television for the Los Angeles Times and San Francisco Chronicle, and finally, Steve Pond, who is the official awards guy at TheWrap.
Hi, Michael, Steve, and Proma. It's great to have you guys here. Thank you for joining us. If you guys would just take a second, and it's an odd year for the Oscars. Everything's delayed. Lots has been impacted because of the pandemic. What do you see as the global themes, the things that people are thinking about in terms of all the Oscars this year?
I mean, I think fundamentally the way that every year the Oscars kind of bring people together and really give them that thing to look for, to talk about the movies that they have watched and enjoyed and to share in that sort of celebratory aspect of it. I think this year people need that probably more than ever. Film buffs especially, movie theaters have been closed mostly all over the world. Some movies are accessible on streaming and on demand. A lot of them aren't. It has completely changed the way that we watch and engage with Oscar-nominated movies in particular because they're so timely. So I think, like me personally, I'm very excited to just share another night with movie fans because I have been missing them in my daily life so much.
Steve?
At this point, there's a lot of, oh my God, it's almost over feeling because the pandemic has resulted in it being so stretched out. It's April. We should be thinking ahead to the Emmys at this point. The Oscars should be 2 months behind us. But I also think that there's a feeling that maybe the Oscars are the end of this crazy awards season, this weirdest awards season ever, and that next year, the awards seasons that start after this will be more like what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, Michael, what do you think?
Yeah, I have to piggyback on what they both said. I think Steve's really right about the length of this award season being so strange. It's the award season that would never end. But I want to point out that although the release schedule was so thrown out of kilter by the pandemic and filmmaking itself was so thrown out of kilter, that the movies that are being honored by the Oscars and by this whole award season are really good movies. I mean, most of the movies that didn't come out were blockbusters and bigger ticket items. So a lot of the movies that would have been considered for awards anyway are the movies we're talking about. I mean, this is a very strong field of Best Picture nominees and Best Director nominees. So in that way, it's been a very good season for film fans. But I have to agree with Proma. It's going to be a thrill to be around those people again.
And I would have to say in the shorts this year, as a guy, I don't know how long you guys have been watching the shorts, but I've been watching them for a long time. This is actually one of the best years for shorts that we've ever had. It's really kind of exciting. Have you seen anything that's come out of the pandemic that's different about the films that have been made this year?
What we're seeing now is mostly films that were made before the pandemic, although they do have, there are themes and things that resonate that I'm sure the filmmakers weren't intending. There's suddenly you see Nomadland and you start thinking of, isolation and being separated from people. And there are themes that resonate even though they weren't necessarily intended to reflect the pandemic. And I think it's the same thing on the shorts. I mean, probably most of these shorts were not made during the pandemic, and maybe next year's shorts will be the ones that really reflect the pandemic. But what we're seeing are very good films that have themes that that because of what we've been through for the past year will resonate more than usual.
I would also shout out Social Distance on Netflix. There have been a few TV series and movies made in this time, as we have said. That one in particular, I was quite fascinated by because it really integrates technology in a way that feels super reflective of the pandemic year that we've all had. It's all recorded through Hangouts and Zoom and FaceTime and like a Google Home, which is just the technology has been one thing that has really been present with everyone. But regarding the Oscar shorts, I think, again, these were not made during the pandemic, but I find myself looking at them quite differently given how much production has had to stretch to accommodate the pandemic and to fit in with these health guidelines and all of that. Short films are made often with a smaller budget, with a smaller crew. It's very difficult, at least, to be making like a Marvel production right now because there are so many people involved in the production and on camera.
Right.
Whereas a short film, like some of the ones that we've seen here, you can just have one director, camera person, actor, very spare crew and set, and it can be some. So while these were not filmed during the pandemic, I think next year's shorts, when they do reflect that, some of them might look entirely the same, and they won't necessarily mention the pandemic explicitly. So we'll see that maybe this area of filmmaking has been fine, has actually been prepared for this all along.
Maybe some recurring themes. Let's look at the shorts categories. We've got the animation, live action, and the documentary. I was really taken by all of the works that we've seen this year. But going through each of the categories, for example, when we look at animation, I'd love to get each one of your thoughts on perhaps what stood out to you and what you thought about the films that were nominated this year. So let's start off with animation. Steve?
It was an interesting group. I was surprised. I there were some that I felt like seeing the short list. I thought, those will get through that didn't. It's an interesting combination because there's very personal and simple. Like if anything happens, I love you, which is mostly line drawings, and it's dealing with a couple in the aftermath of a school shooting that takes their daughter. I mean, but then you have opera is, I think, meant to be seen on a huge screen as an installation where it's just, running over and over all day long. It's more of an art piece than a little short film. Like Burrow is a thoroughly charming Pixar movie about a rabbit trying to find a home. And that couldn't be more different than something like opera. I mean, it's often like that, I think, in the animated shorts category because animation contains so much. But you have a couple of real art pieces, and then you have some very good sort of straightforward entertainment, and then you have a very emotional piece. It's quite the cross section.
Proma, what did you think?
Well, I love the animated category because I am always just so struck by all of the different visual styles that are brought to it. Because, a lot of the time I think you assume animation is 2D like we saw in like Disney movies in the 90s or the more CGI that they're moving towards now. But there's so much to be done in the animation space, and that's incredible. I think that we, as someone who's not in the animation space at all, I simply have no concept of what those artists are capable of, and I love seeing that brought to the front in this category. So opera, like you mentioned, opera was stunning. I was absolutely breathtaking watching it. I watched it again. I was pausing. I was trying to see all the details of all the little parts. I agree. I can imagine seeing that on a big screen, and I hope that I get to. Opera, I feel like, is in its own category for the visual style, but Genius Loki was so beautiful and really a good use of, I think, mixed media, different languages of animation almost.
Michael?
I really want to shout out two of the other nominees. I mean, you folks have mentioned opera, which I think is pretty interesting. As I think Steve said, it is intended to be an installation and it's meant to be shown on a continuous loop. I think I've described it before as a malevolent Rube Goldberg machine with human beings in it. And I think it's like a socioeconomic pachinko game. That's what it is. Because I think I think that it has a pretty jaded and cynical view of how society works, and I'm not going to disagree with the filmmakers on that. You can't catch all of it in one viewing. I have no idea how many viewings it would take to get all the details of this movie, but the fact that it goes through this hideous cycle that becomes worse and worse and worse and gets to the bottom, then comes all the way back to the top. I think that deserves some sort of special consideration. The imagination and the attention to detail that went into making that film really impressed me. And I loved Yes People. I think Yes People is hilarious. The Icelandic movie where the only dialogue is the Icelandic word for yes. It's so funny, right? It's spoken by many different characters. It has different meanings. And the filmmakers accomplished so much with facial expressions and body language. I'm really looking forward to seeing more by these filmmakers. I think that they're going to be very expressive. That said, the gut punch is If Anything Happens, I Love You, which is probably the biggest gut punch of in any of the categories at the Oscars this year. I mean, that it works you over to watch. But while the subject matter, it's going to get the headlines, people are going to talk about that rightfully, I think the film is also about the potentially toxic nature of grief. That if you don't learn to cope with grief, that it can destroy relationships and it can even destroy lives. So I think it's a pretty profound film, not just that it shocks you with that horrible plot element, but that I think it's about something important.
I think it's interesting because to me it very much ties into other nominees this year. I mean, it ties into Pieces of a Woman. It ties into Promising Young Woman. It ties into the Robin Wright movie Land, which wasn't nominated. But there are a lot of movies this year that have explored the price of grief and whether it's even possible to work through it. So I think it very much caught something that's being discussed in art a lot this year.
What about live action films? There are 5 amazing live action films. What did you guys think about those?
I think the live action category is very strong this year, and I truly don't say this all the time. I think you can make a strong case for any of the 5 nominees. I think that a film like Two Distant Strangers, it interests me not just because it's so bloody current, and we wish we could say things like, well, it'll be in voters' minds because the Black Lives Matters protests from last year, but look at the headlines from just the last few days.
Right.
This is the kind of story that is always current. Even that subject aside, I found it very interesting that the film recovered from what I regard as a pretty awkward start, the kind of morning after chat that didn't really ring true for me. But then when it gets into the sort of Groundhog Day, darkly comic time loop, an unusual take on this very serious subject, it caught on for me. And then when it took that very dark turn at the end that I won't spoil for your viewers, that's when I thought that this could be worthy of an Oscar. That final turn that the story takes, it makes it a very, very dark and salient commentary. But I want to say my personal fave among them, I think, is Feeling Through, which is the one involving the first deaf-mute actor to be in a lead role. And now, my take on this is that it really works for me because it succeeds in depicting a good person. And that sounds hilariously shallow, but when you think about it, it's hard to depict a character in a way that reaches you below the surface, that really convinces you who that person is below the surface. I'm not talking about good guys and bad guys. I'm talking about the main character, the kid. The decisions he makes, the way he's affected by the deaf-mute man he meets. The filmmakers did such a beautiful job of convincing me that this is a good person, and you really come out of the film rooting for him. To me, it's kind of the difference between Steve Rogers and Clark Kent. The way the MCU has depicted Steve Rogers. Everybody loves him, right? I mean, you think, that's a great guy. I'd like to know Steve Rogers. Clark Kent, you can take or leave. They haven't really fleshed him out as a human. So that's why I really liked Feeling Through.
Proma, what resonated for you?
I mean, I loved all of them. White Eye was the one that I was surprised by how much I, once again, was immersed in that. And when you watch the turn, when you see what this one little event could lead to, that's really well done. And it was one shot, I believe, unless I blinked at the wrong moment. That was one shot. So well done. And this is what I'm talking about when, I'm saying that short film has always been so good at using minimal resources to create something incredible. That is one shot that must have been super rehearsed to just a handful of actors, but it comes across really, really well.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve?
I do feel like Two Distant Strangers takes a premise that could feel like a gimmick and then absolutely, earns it and pulls it off. I think the two that are from the Middle East are also both very strong, which is Wide Eye, which which, as Proma said, has this crazy, it was filmed in one 20-minute take, but it doesn't draw attention to that. And it works. I think The Present, the other one from the Middle East, which just won the award at BAFTA, is really strong as well. And it does something that Oscar voters tend to love, which is it takes a child and puts them in the midst of a crisis situation. So you can't dismiss that one. I also feel like we need to show some love for Oscar Isaac's mustache in the letter room because
Absolutely. Deserves its own
Absolutely.
Oscar,
it's formidable.
I think. I couldn't start talking about it because I would never stop. So you go ahead.
Those are 5 great films. What about it was interesting, and I think this is an interesting question. We had because there were so many when we started. We had Vidya Balan, who's one of the biggest stars in India. We had Tilda Swinton, who was in a short that was nominated. We had, of course, Oscar Isaac made it through to the nomination. Tilda Swinton was in one that was shortlisted, sorry. And a number of other stars. Julianne Moore was in a qualified film, Don Cheadle. So lots of stars in shorts this year, in live action shorts. What do you guys think that means? And what does it say about the category?
For me, I think the Oscar Isaac one is easy. His wife directed it. I was very, very surprised that The Human Voice, the film with Tilda Swinton that was directed by Pedro Almodovar, did not get a nomination. It made the short list,
Yes.
and I thought that one and Two Distant Strangers were the 2 locks for nominations from those 10 films on the short list. We've always had stars in short films because there are always stars who see them as a way to to get in on the ground floor with up and coming talent. Sally Hawkins was in a award-winning Oscar short, the Phone Call, a few years ago. It's not unusual. I think there may have been more than usual this year, but obviously Tilda came in because it was Pedro, and Oscar came in because it was his wife Elvira. But I think it is such a strong form, and people realize that more now than they did 10 or 15 years ago, that why not, if you're a star, take a couple days and act in a short.
Yeah, Carter, you mentioned the Indian actor Vidya Balan, and I have been watching Indian movies my entire life. So for me, in terms of shorts from that part of the world, I've always found that there's so much untapped creativity and potential in the stories that are put forth in those shorts. So I can definitely see how, as an actor, that's something that would really draw you in. And with these shorts as well, we see that there's some really exciting premises and storytelling. And often it's not a premise that can be expanded into a feature or can be given to a blockbuster director. It's something that needs to be told in a specific way by someone who has the voice for it at that level.
Proma, I just want to add, it's interesting you mentioned that because we had spoken to Vidya. The shorts, it's just a whole new ballgame for them, and they're still expanding. So for her, she said she thought, a short film? Wait, who does a short film? And after doing this film, it really opened up her eyes to a different world. And they're seeing that, there is another way of creative storytelling, that it doesn't have to be done on a feature level length.
Yeah.
I always think of stars being in shorts because I remember Steve Martin in The Absent-Minded Waiter, or whatever that was called. That was it's one of the first shorts I ever saw, one of the first Oscar-winning shorts I ever saw. And of course, sometimes it's sort of a proof of concept for what the thing's going to be, which might be the case with that Oscar Isaac one. I think that could become a feature. And of course, Whiplash, not too long ago, was proof of concept, and J.K. Simmons was in that.
Well, I was going to move on to the documentary because we had 5 compelling stories from around the world, and just very touching stories. And I'd love to get your feedback on what resonated with you. What did you guys think about these 5 shorts?
Yeah, this was a great crop of documentary shorts. I was so engrossed by all of them. I think maybe because I watched it the most recently, but Hunger Ward really stayed with me and stuck with me. I mean, you've all seen it. There are some very upsetting things in this film that I've never seen anywhere and probably won't ever see again. I honestly hope I don't ever see them again, but the way that it's done, it's very just muted, like the camera work, the way that they follow these doctors in the hunger ward is, it feels like you're there. It feels like you're really kind of on the ground, and there's this urgency about it of, which a lot of documentaries do, feature or short, this urgency of, why aren't we talking about this? Why aren't we doing something about this? What can I do right now? The urgency that you can really feel like in your bones, in your skin, in the very moment, to be like, I want to help and I want to fix this. So it's a really, really excellent film in that way. Looking at the other ones, I loved Concerto as a Conversation just because it was kind of this sweet like family film as well. They were just talking, the grandfather and the grandson, about their lives and the interplay with the music. And then Colette, I thought, was really, really moving. Not something that I knew a lot about, and the subject of the documentary is so kind of frank and funny and very charming on screen, even when she's discussing things that are really difficult for her and about her past and her brother, as well as kind of making jokes through tears to kind of get through this closure she's trying to find emotionally. I thought that was also very well done, and it could have been focused on this sort of trauma porn that comes up in a lot of films, but again, focusing it on one family and on her personal journey and grief was really, really powerful.
Steve, what about you?
I mean, what I think is interesting is, to me, this category really shows the change in the documentary branch over the last few years, because the documentary branch has added more people than any other branch. If you go back 10 years and look at the Oscar nominated shorts for short documentary, they are almost all 40-minute films made by HBO about really hard-hitting subjects. And it's the one that doesn't make you want to slit your wrist that would win every year. But it was very much of a certain type. This year and over the last few years, they've really gone away from that. There's a huge variety here. I mean, you look at something like A Love Song for Latasha, it's a movie about Latasha Harlins, the girl who was killed, who helped launch the LA riots in the early 90s. But it's a very lyrical film. It's sort of a celebration of her life. It's not an investigation into what happened in her death. It's a very different take than you would expect from if you said, oh, there's a short documentary that was nominated for an Oscar and it's about Latasha Harlin. So there's more variety there. Concerto as a Conversation is another thing. It's a conversation between, a man and his grandfather. But it encompasses so much in terms of race in America. And Colette looks at World War II and the Nazis, but it does it through this character study of this wonderfully stubborn, unsentimental woman that you fall in love with as she's revisiting this part of her past. I mean, I feel like there's a lot more variety than you might have seen in the past, and I think that makes the category stronger.
Michael?
I really agree that the field of nominees shows change, at least in the world of documentaries, because I think that the way that we think of documentaries has evolved a lot in the last dozen or so years. I think Michael Moore had something to do with that. But these films, they use filmmaking techniques that I think would have once been frowned upon in documentaries, especially something like Love Song for Latasha that's so subjective. It's something that tries to, as Steve was saying, get into the personality of the young girl instead of hanging on the news event. That's one reason why I really like Concerto. Concerto is, of the nominees, it's the only feel-good movie. And the reason that I feel good after watching that movie is I get a warm sense of the real love between the two subjects. And I think it might also have a hometown edge in that one of those subjects, the co-director, is Chris Bowers, a rising young composer. So there might be some Hollywood love for that, and of course there'll be, among the voters, there'll be a lot of interest in Latasha because that's something that many of them will remember. They'll remember that happening. And Hunger Ward, wow, that movie is a tough watch. And it's definitely the kind of tough watch that we should see. In some ways, I feel like it's the most traditionally made of the documentaries. It's kind of the hard-hitting news story. But, it shows you the real palpable suffering of children in such terrible ways. That movie's hard to shake. The one that I want to talk about that we haven't brought up is Do Not Split. Do Not Split works best for me because it feels so boots on the ground. You're in those crowds. For the people who haven't watched it, it's about pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong, many of whom are college age, and they're protesting a specific law, but really they're protesting Chinese grip on their government. So these folks are really struggling for self-governance. They're struggling for the sovereignty of their own nation. And you're in those crowds. You see some of them throwing firebombs, and you see what they're up against. So it's a very visceral film about something that is still happening now today. In fact, the Chinese government reportedly has leaned on the outlets that it can lean on to not carry the Oscars live or downplay them. Hong Kong won't be carrying the Oscars live for the first time in decades. So I hope that one doesn't get swept under the rug, because it is a very strong field.
And it's a very strong field, and it's amazing that one short is really having such an international impact.
Mm-hmm. And I'd love to just add and get your thoughts on, over the years, though, how have you seen the changes in the shorts category in general? I mean, there used to be a time when I can imagine, since you've started covering, especially for you, Steve, when it wasn't as popular. And now over the years, I think people have taken a bigger interest or a larger interest in this category. What are your thoughts, or what changes have you seen evolve?
Yeah, I think it's changed. It's changed dramatically, and part of it is that you can't see them in theaters. It used to be the shorts were the tiebreaker categories, and you would just look down the list, and it's like, oh, that one's about the Holocaust. Okay, that'll win. And you weren't judging it on the basis of the films, because most people didn't have a chance to see the films. Now, if you want to see the films, you can see them. It's become broader, it's become more popular, and the films have become a lot more accessible. Now you can actually, most people filling out their Oscar ballots at home, if they want, they can make a really educated guess on the shorts and not just look at which one has to do with the Holocaust.
Yeah, even my 85-year-old dad is very keyed up on every single short that might or might not win. More than I'd ever imagined when we started this. Michael, what about you? I used to have to, when we started doing these releases, I would call the LA Times and beg just to be able to pitch a reviewer on why they should do a review of the shorts. And I wasn't successful very often. So, it's
Yeah.
no, not with you. It was before your time.
I'm the shorts guy. Or one. I have always thought that they should be covered because, as you guys know, Rasha and Carter know very, very well, that there's so much great filmmaking that goes into them, and often better filmmaking than goes into features. As somebody who has to watch, Proma and Steve, as you guys know, we have to watch so many features, and often a few minutes in the feature you're going, oh God, I do have to watch the rest of this, don't I? But with the shorts, when the shorts get to a certain level, when they even qualify to make shortlists, then they've already gone through all of these layers of filtering. And that's not to say that those are the only good ones either. There's so much interesting filmmaking going on there that's unfettered by studio interference or budgetary or let's say bottom line, So there are these wonderful stories that are being told that you're not going to see in a Cineplex. So, and making movies like Opera, that's a freaky little movie. Let's celebrate freaky little movies.
And he had the flexibility to make it because it was his own venture. He's the director. He's looking out for it. He has nobody above him telling him what can or cannot be put in it. So it's completely his vision and creation.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's the moment when you guys get to tell us which do you think, and let's start with ladies first. We'll start with Proma. Maybe Proma, tell us in your mind, and we'll just go around the table, but let's try animation first. Proma, who do you pick as the winner?
Sure. I don't know how much argument we're going to have because we all brought this up very prominently, but if anything happens, I love you.
Is your pick for...
Yeah, I think just it's a really powerful story, really strong execution, and keeping it contained with this family and just telling this sort of tragic story with a very strong core.
Okay. That's your pick. Steve, are you on board with that, or do you have a different view?
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely on board with that. I think if you look at the history in the category, voters do look for a film that makes an emotional connection and feels personal to the filmmakers. There are some exceptions, but I think that one stands out this year as the one that, because of the emotional clout, I think it's clearly the winner.
But Michael, you just said you thought opera cut a new ground. Definitely in the world of animation, it's something completely unique, something we all agree we've never seen before. You don't think it has a chance?
I think the winner is going to be the SpongeBob movie. No, I think if anything happens, I Love You is as close to a lock as I see in the Oscars this year. If anyone's filling out their Oscar pools, you can go put money on this one. I think. I mean, Chadwick Boseman and probably Daniel Kaluuya and Soul. I think this one is winner, and deservedly. I'll be very happy to see it win.
Steve, I tell you what, you do live action first. Who do you think is the winner?
I think it's not as much a lock as animated, but I think Two Distant Strangers will win live action because I think it packs the biggest punch and feels so absolutely timely in this week that the voters are casting their ballots. Never underestimate children in peril in this category, so I think the present has an outside chance, but I really think it's going to be Two Distant Strangers.
Proma, how about you? What are you gonna lean towards?
I am not going to fight. I am going to agree again. Two Distant Strangers. As Steve said, it packs a punch, and I think what's just extra amazing here is that it packs a punch without sacrificing all of the other production elements that make a film worthy of an Oscar. It's just all around really, really well done.
And Michael, are you gonna dissent?
Yes. Are you gonna fight? Come on, Michael.
Come on.
Let's hear it.
It's gonna be SpongeBob. It's SpongeBob. No, I'm sorry that I want to fight, but I just agree with everything they just said. I mean, I'll be surprised if it doesn't win. Also, not as much of a lock as if anything happens, I Love You. But it's so current. It's happening right now. Everybody has to be on voters' minds. Yeah. But actually, the leader in Vegas odds, the last I saw, was The Letter Room.
Can I ask you, but let me ask you a question about that. Don't you think that if you're going to put your odds on who's going to vote with who, and this is to everybody, but Michael in particular, why wouldn't you think that the largest branch would stand behind a spectacular performance by one of their members in The Letter Room?
Well, as we were talking about before, it's not unusual to see major stars nominated, but they don't always win. It seems like every year there's some major star in a short. And while I like The Letter Room and think it would make a very viable feature, it's not going to have the immediacy for voters of Two Distant Strangers. And frankly, voters they want to be on the right side of history. They want to make statements from time to time, and I think that this is one area where they will make a statement. That's my guess. Okay. I could certainly be wrong. I have to say at this point also that live action is probably the category that I get wrong most in all of my Oscar pools. Live action shorts. That's the one that
Michael, we're going to call you up right after the Oscars.
I'm glad that the sound categories are now won, because they'd always screw me up, splitting those two. But live action, because I'd always go with my heart. I'd say I want this one to win, and the Academy would pick another one.
But I think the other thing that is hard about this category this year, and I've been doing this for 16, we've been releasing the shorts for 16 years, is that the films are very good. And if you watch each one of them, you think, okay, well, I could vote for that, or okay, I could vote for that one. And they're fabulous films, amazing issues, great storytelling. It's kind of fun year. What about the docs? I think there's got to be more dissension on the docs. Michael, I think you have to go first.
Oh, yeah. The docs, I think, are the hardest to pick this year. And I'll say again, I poll these various folks, and they're all split. But I would say that the one that seems to be gaining steam among predictors is Love Song for Latasha, for the reasons we discussed before. It's topical and it's local. But I'm gonna thumb my nose at them, even my great colleague Glenn at the Envelope. I'm gonna go with Do Not Split. I think Do Not Split is gonna surprise folks. Shall we say other docs will split the vote?
Well said, Michael.
Yeah. Look, it's probably wishful thinking on my part, because I would give it the award if I gave out the award, but I'm gonna guess Do Not Split.
Fantastic, great pick. Steve, you're next this time, and Proma gets to be the final picker.
I agree. This is the toughest of the shorts categories to predict. I do not agree that Do Not Split is the one that will win. I mean, I do think it's probably between Love Song for Latasha and Concerto Was a Conversation, the two local films. Now that could be completely wrong because there are so many international voters now. I can see Do Not Split getting a surge just because it's the reason Hong Kong isn't broadcasting the Oscars. I mean, that's a possibility. I could also see Hunger Ward getting in here because, if you think to all five shorts, what is the image you remember? I mean, to me, it's those children in Hunger Ward. But in general, it feels like a Love Song for Latasha or a Concerto Was a Conversation. And I look back and it's like films that had central female characters have won 3 years in a row and 7 out of the last 10. So I'm going with Love Song for Latasha, which means that Netflix would sweep all 3 shorts categories.
That it would be amazing.
Proma, where do you stand?
I can see where in another world, maybe that world is just a previous decade or so, where Colette would be a very obvious choice for Oscar voters. But the Academy looks different now than it did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, so maybe not. My only thing with Love Song for Latasha, I would love it to win. I honestly don't totally have faith in the voting body. A lot of award shows like to seem like they're doing work and caring about an issue and highlighting something, and then they fall short at a certain point. There are a lot of films this year about the Black experience in America, some of them based on fact, some of them... Actually, I think most of them are based on fact. Like, even with the features, we have, like, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, we have Judas and the Black Messiah. These are based on real events. I can see some voters just giving up after that point and being like, I'm gonna just vote for the feel good or vote for this thing that's about something else. I hope they don't. I hope that they still... Love Song for Latasha, I think, is a really great choice for this category. It has some of that animation, which we talked about, the beautiful visual imagery. It's, again, a large-scale issue distilled to the powerful emotions of how it impacted the people who loved this person. I think, I'm going to put my faith in the Academy. I'm going to pick Love Song for Latasha.
Okay, so you two votes for Love Song and 1 vote for Do Not Split.
Hey, Carter, I know you can't say, but Rasha, what do you say?
What do I pick?
Yeah.
See, it's hard.
It's, yes, I think all 5 of them are just so different in their element. But for me, Do Not Split. I just
Oh, it's a tie now. It's a tie.
Rasha
It's a
power.
tie.
We are
yeah,
split.
it's a tie. Do not split. Maybe that comes from the fact of speaking to the filmmaker too, but like just knowing the perils that they had to go through. But yeah, just there was something I think that stood out to me above the other films.
I have to say that the filmmaker, if you guys get a chance to interview him, he is the coolest person practically on the face of the earth. Kind of like a little bit interesting and a little bit crazy. Like, okay, yeah, well, yeah,
Yes.
I was in the middle of a group of the riot. I didn't realize they were shooting bullets or they're landing right all around me. It's like, oh my gosh, that is amazing.
Well, we are going to have to wrap up here. I would just love to get briefly from from the three of you. So what makes a film Oscar worthy?
It's a film that stays with you. Like maybe that's a very easy, obvious answer, but when I think about the best shorts I've seen over time, I think about Oscar-winning films over time that I have adored. They are the ones that have stayed with me. Whether I watch them one time or 10 times, it sticks, and that story will then be part of you forever.
Michael?
I think that Oscar voters like to feel like they're awarding something important that has some sort of social significance. I think that often comes into their thinking, and is probably why they so often ignore great comedies. That may change this year with something like Nomadland, although you could certainly say that Nomadland is a commentary on where we are in America now. But I do think that there's a pattern of that. There's a history of that in Oscar nominating and voting, that they tend to say, see, we're on the right side of history with this. And, I'm not saying they're insincere about it either. And I'm not saying, for instance, that if Two Distant Strangers were to win, that it wouldn't deserve it, because you've heard us praise this short to the heavens. But you're asking what makes something Oscar worthy? I mean, there are so many great movies every year that just don't even get considered for Oscars.
Okay, thank you guys a lot. It's been great to have you. This is really a fun chat, and I think, we'll see. You guys are both all together. Maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong in the first two categories, but that third category, it's an even split. So I'll be watching particularly carefully in the docs to see who wins and who doesn't. Thank you all very much. It's great.
Hey,
Great
thank
to
you.
have you.
Thank you for your insight
Thank
and
you.
time
Thanks for having
today.
us.
Such a pleasure.
Yes, and thank you for reviewing all of our films. It's great. Wow, Rasha, that was pretty interesting. Looks like at least in one category, the docs, everything is totally wide open. Who knows who's going to win? But live action and animation, well, there's some pretty decided winners, at least among these guys.
Yeah, it seems so. I guess we're just going to have to find out if their predictions are correct on April 25th.
Yep, we certainly will, just a few short days away. Well, that's it from us here at the ShortsTV podcast. Let us know if you agree with our predictions by tweeting us at ShortsTVUS.
That's right, and don't forget to subscribe. See you soon.